What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. We help recruit today's go-to-market teams that will lead the next generation of unicorns. This podcast is also being sponsored by Allego, which allows you to record your best content for practice, collaboration, and feedback, and give sales teams a way to organize all of their best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help everyone improve sales performance. Email me, web, at thejdavidgroup.com so I can introduce you to someone who will take great care of you. My guest today is Brent Keltner, who's making his second appearance on Over Quota. By the way, after this episode, go back and listen to episode 73, where he talks about the 3 pillars of growth acceleration, which I thought was a fantastic episode. Brent is the founder and president of Winalytics, which helps clients reach their top growth potential by shifting from product-driven conversations to authentic conversations that anchor on buyer-defined value. Prior to Winalytics, he spent 10 years as a revenue leader in early stage and enterprise companies and 10 years as a PhD social scientist at Stanford and the Rand Corporation. He's now also the author of the Revenue Acceleration Playbook, creating an authentic buyer journey across sales, marketing, and customer success. Brent, welcome to Over Quota.
Hey, again. Joe. Jay, thanks so much for having me back. It's
Absolutely.
great to be here.
Absolutely. So I was curious because I don't know if we might not have even talked about this candidly. I know we didn't talk about this actually because we haven't talked in a while, but I started promoting the fact that I'm going to be putting together a book over the next year or so. And as I'm thinking about this and trying to put it together, I'm just obviously more curious about the gathering process, the building process, but also the promoting process, the promoting part of the book process. I'm trying to build up my audience now and just sort of get a groundswell, I guess, if you will. So over the next year, when I say, hey, here's the book, everybody go buy it. Tell me what your experience was in promoting the book.
Yeah, well, you're going about it in the right order, which is build your audience, build your platform. As you're building the book, writing the book, you're kind of dripping out insights from your learnings or recruiting methodology or whatever it's about. And then there's already folks that are amplifying and promoting and then excited to buy and review when you do it. That's the right approach. I really started to build an audience as I started to write the book. And for people that don't have the audience yet, that can work as well, because I did the things that I just described to you, wrote a series of insight posts that were ways of writing content for different chapters of the book. And, once upon a time, if I got 8 people to engage with an insight post, and that was a year and a half ago, like a LinkedIn post, I was happy. Mm-hmm. Now it's probably 50 on average and often goes over 100 just because you build the regularity of your voice and your point of view and agree on a certain kind of format like you have with your show. Mm-hmm. And you'll find a niche of people that like what you're doing and will lean in, and that builds its own momentum.
And so what, I know podcasts, obviously, because you were on here promoting the book. How did those go for you? First of all, how many podcasts were you on leading up to the release of the book?
Maybe 50.
Okay, wow.
In like 6 months, and you were number 1, Jay.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, you were number 1. I think it was probably, October to, I think it was probably 50 or close. Mm-hmm. And I'll give a plug for a group, Salescast, who actually organized my podcast tour. And they help people to run their own podcast, which wasn't my goal, but they can also book you on podcast tour. So I did like 50 of them. Hmm. And then we developed a kind of content strategy between email, our website, LinkedIn, and a newsletter. We sort of early on, I got on this idea of a monthly newsletter that would allow us to feature both revenue leader stories, which we still do a couple of a month, but then also to kind of the revenue acceleration playbook. It's about a series of plays you can run to accelerate your revenue. So we would use the newsletter to drip out different plays, capture them from, like you and I did a podcast, we took a snippet or a write-up or whatever. So that newsletter became an anchor for us to then distribute things through email and LinkedIn and other social channels.
Wow, you just gave me a good idea for content for this podcast. That's something I actually don't do, but I should, which is, to your point, take excerpts of, for instance, like this interview, and then share it with people on my email list. And then if they want even more, they can come and listen to the full episode had they not already heard it,
100%. And you could have very cost effectively get a content writer to write blog posts.
Yeah, right. On the same sort of like taking little snippets from the pillar content, if you will, right? And yeah, that's very good. I like that. Okay, cool.
You asked me in the pre-conversation about inbound.
Yep.
Inbound, HubSpot's inbound, and this was a massive theme. How do you amplify content or write it in discrete snippets? And the consensus over and over and over again is you need to you reuse the content, and then you basically people have different learning styles or different ways they want to engage.
That's right, because some people might be audio, some people are more visual, some people like to read. It's funny, I just put something on LinkedIn, actually it was just this morning, and a gentleman said, do you have transcripts? Which before we recorded, I told you I was using Otter to try to do that, and that's why, because sometimes there are time constraints and everything else. So yeah, that's very, very, very good. What about was there any way for you to quantify the audience growth based on those 50 podcasts that you went on, in terms of people engaging, either to say, I heard you on this podcast, or just sort of, I don't know, estimated numbers that you can figure to say, like, this is what?
I mean, not specific to the podcast, but I would say our audience, that I can measure on LinkedIn is, grown 3 or 4, both audience and engagement levels has grown 3 or 4 fold.
Wow. No kidding. Okay. Yeah.
In probably 18 months. So, I mean, literally when I started putting inside posts, 6 people might engage, and, now it's probably averages 45 or 50 and some higher, but I probably have 300 connections on LinkedIn, and I just keep adding, and the vast majority of those are people that engaged in some kind of LinkedIn, or they reached out after a webinar or whatever, and then I added them to my network. I will say about podcasting that the first 2 pure book leads came in from podcasts.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I just heard you on Doug Burdett's The Marketing Book podcast. And that started an engagement, which, then led to great, and so you dialogue a little bit, and then they were interested in downloadable assets, which we have on our website, share those over, and then they start to implement that, and they're like, oh, this is harder than it looks. You've done this dozens of times. So it starts a conversation about, could you accelerate our time frame to getting this all done? But yeah, the first 2 pure book leads came from people that heard about it on podcasts.
All right, let's back up for a second and talk to me about, maybe we talked about this in the first episode, but I can't remember, and a number of people I'm sure did not listen to that. So it's worth asking, which is, what was the goal of the book? Was it for awareness? Was it to drive leads, as you just mentioned? Was it something else? Tell me a little bit about what you were.
Yeah, no, the goal for me was to grow a consulting business. And so we, as do revenue acceleration, go to market, and revenue acceleration, or sales acceleration consulting. And I was, I've done this for 20 years, first as a revenue leader and then as a consultant. And so this was really writing down the entire methodology. And there's a couple of unique things about it that I wanted to get in front of people, and we can dig into that in a second. But I really wanted to write it down and just to be the expert. And that has paid off in spades. I mean, the other thing that I see all the time, I get these inbound leads from people I've known for years that they'll now say, hey, I was talking to my CEO about you and your company. Right? They never would have taken it to their CEO or C-suite before, but now you've got a book, even though I haven't changed anything in how we do our consulting engagements, but now you've got a book, and so you're the expert.
Yeah.
And you do, like you do, you have a LinkedIn presence that people see, even if they don't engage.
Yeah.
And so our ability to get to the C-suite has gone up exponentially.
Can you quantify it? In other words, can you tell me about, you mentioned your audience growth. What about revenue growth in terms of, 2x or 3x or?
Yeah, if we check, it's talking a year, and it's one of your rapid fire questions. I'll have a better sense on that. I mean, what I would say is it literally is in the last month that I've seen like this just start to boom, 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 boom. And I don't know what, but I mean, those 2 book leads I described, those came in the same day.
Wow.
Right. And then I was like, I mean, it's been really interesting, and it's probably about getting out and about, but I set a goal to double the number of initial sales calls.
Yep.
And I set that, a year ago, and October and November, or September, October, the first time we're ever going to do that.
That's amazing. I love it.
Right. And a lot of that's a book leads, but then these other folks who I mentioned, a senior executive who's, leading a sales team, and he needs to work with a success team. And I've known him for years. And he said, hey, I was talking to my CEO about you. So getting a big public company who shall remain nameless, and the, SVP of sales just reach out and said, hey, we've been talking for years about doing stuff together. And now I think there may be a moment of opportunity, and he's seeing his sales leadership, right? So there's a credibility level that now people are coming to you to help solve a problem. So, could it help us double? We're not a big company. We have sort of touched that $1 million mark, which only 5% of companies do, but that's still a small company. So could it help us double over the next 12 to 18 months? My guess is yes.
Let me just touch on that credibility thing for a second, because to me it's interesting. In other words, you already had a relationship with the person who sort of sent it up the flagpole to the CEO, and you already presumably had credibility with your contacts over the years, right? I would imagine. Is it that your contact now felt like they had a little bit more armor, I guess, to go to the CEO with, right? In other words, it wasn't just their word about who you are and your credibility, but it was their word plus a whole bunch of other people's who have shown interest in the book. And now they were like, okay, look, like not only me, but there are other referenceable people besides me that don't even have a stake in what I'm asking you right now today. Is that fair to say?
100%. I mean, that's a really powerful impact. Like their armor, or their political capital risk, right? Nobody gets fired for buying IBM, is much bigger.
Right.
But it's also their own confidence, right? By the time they're tracking your podcast and seeing, oh yeah, guy associates with some really well-known people, and oh, he's being asked to speak here, or there he's up on stage with David Meerman Scott, who helped him with his book, right? Is that over time you build, they're like, oh, I guess that person's a player.
Right.
So I think it's both.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Going back to the LinkedIn for a moment there, when you do go from 6 people engaging on average to say over 50, how do you engage with the people that engage? Is it just something that you slow drip and just let build over time and wait for the inbound? Is it something where you go through and start connecting with people systematically if they're not already a first connection? What has been your process there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm honestly still trying to figure that out. And it's LinkedIn is interesting in that it's a very active platform, but I don't think people really want to be sold there at all. Like I think they very quickly get turned off, is my experience selling there. So what I do is, and I've now, honestly hired somebody, I'm probably being too transparent to kind of manage my profile, right?
Yeah, right.
Anybody who engages that is a second or third connection is just send them a note saying, hey, thanks for engaging with that post. Love to add you to my LinkedIn network, any more substantive reaction I will take.
Mhm.
And then often people say, hey, I love this or that. And I'll send over stuff. And then I make them aware that we have a diagnostic around the book and that we have downloadable assets. And I usually, with people that have a more substantive comment, I'll follow up twice
Mhm.
and see if they will engage and take that further. I remember one gentleman who was in a line sales role, and he's like, this is awesome. Our whole company needs it. And so I just shared over some assets for him to take to his CRO. And his CRO kind of killed it because they have their own approach, and that's fine. So I usually think about 2 substantive follow-ups where I'm sharing an article, or I'm sharing our diagnostic, or I'm sharing something of value,
Mhm.
encouraging them to deepen the conversation. And if they engage with that, then I say, hey, do you want to get on and do a discovery call? And in one of the cases of those inbound leads, it started with, I heard about you on Doug Burdick's podcast. I shared over the downloadable assets and invited to a discovery conversation. Nothing happened. And then 2 months later, I got a note saying, I've been talking to my CEO about this. We've gone as far as we can. Can you get on a phone call with us?
I love it. That's fantastic.
Mm.
So we're talking about LinkedIn growth. What about the newsletter growth? Did you see subscribers increase there as a result of the book promotion?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, before the book came out in LinkedIn, nobody ever signed up, right? We signed people up. I wouldn't say there's a massive number. Honestly, much more engagement with our downloadable plays,
Mhm.
or there's probably 100+ people that have downloaded from there. The newsletter, let's say it's dozens.
Okay. Yep.
Let's say
Okay.
it's hundreds that have taken it proactively. But what it does, Jay, is now, honestly, every time I get off any kind of meaningful interaction, I have a spreadsheet
Right.
that is like October, November, December. And this is where the person who's managed my LinkedIn profile, also now I just forward those emails and it goes into our October upload, goes into our November upload. So we upload every month people that have meaningfully engaged with
Mhm.
us. And now every month they're getting a newsletter from you that's just making you look like a genius, right? For all the people you're talking to and your insight posts. And we also do, like you do a podcast, we do a revenue leader series with
Mhm.
stories.
Mhm.
And so they're hearing from us 3 times a month, typically. Story, newsletter,
Mhm.
all value added stuff. It's like no asks and any of that.
Yeah. It's like jab, 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 and eventually there'll be a cross.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. Well, what's nice
And so
about
we actually started doing this for some of our clients. I mean, as you know, we do more sales and account management, but we've gotten pulled into marketing content and building web content funnels. And we do with them say, hey, what's our monthly newsletter layout? Because what it found like for us is it was a way of saying, are we developing enough content
Mm.
of the right types to fill into the personas that we want to sell to? So it's a great discipline around your content strategies. Just envision, I need a monthly newsletter, different programs I'm running, or different, different, the show people have a term for it that I'm drawing a blank on. But different personas maybe you're speaking to, and have I filled that out? So we build our content calendar months in advance on who are our 2 revenue leader stories.
Mhm.
Are we going to have any featured podcasts? Do we have like a article that's coming out? Usually there's 6 things that we're trying to fill.
I saw some short form interviews that you put on your YouTube channel actually, and it left me wanting more, like,
Yeah,
and then I went looking for it. I go, okay, here's the short version. I'm like, where the heck is the long version? Because I want to hear more about this, but there wasn't any. So anyways, maybe that's just me because
well, that's interesting.
yeah.
There should be a way to get right from the snippet to the
Mm.
full interview.
So there is a whole interview. It's not just that short.
We haven't made those public because we usually like, but there's no reason we couldn't. I mean, so it's interesting. We don't think of ourselves as doing a podcast. We
Yeah.
think of ourselves as doing revenue leader stories. But to your point, there's no reason you couldn't have them click through to the revenue leader story and then hear the full interview right there. I mean,
Right. Just optionality, like it's kind of like flavor. If you want to hear more, you can hear more,
I am, thank you. I'm going to make that adjustment.
There you go. I feel like we're just having coffee in Cambridge somewhere.
Yeah.
No, just inviting everybody else. inviting
I
everybody
like you
else.
in person. You're a big energy guy, so I'll take the coffee in Cambridge.
There you go. Absolutely, for sure, for sure. Let me ask you this. Oh, actually, one other thing I wanted to say about the email marketing for a second, the newsletter is that what's cool about that is that when you do all the promotion of the book, you go on podcasts, you post on LinkedIn, all those things, and then you have people that come to your email list, and let's say to your point, there's 12, right? There's a lot of value in that because you're not paying for those leads anymore. You already have them, number one. And then when one of those 12 converts, there you go, right? In other words, it's the return is there for sure. That's what's so great about building an email list, in my opinion.
Yep. I would say one other thing, and it's the next wave for us, is we're actually starting to segment our database around the major industries that we sell into, and thinking about, do you have versions of that newsletter by vertical or whatever? Because what is true about, I think, about content consumers, we talked about the two axes, which is boosting their confidence and then giving them the armor to go to their boss. The other part of it is just the social proof. I mean, we do a heck of a lot better where people in common, even if it's not directly, but sort of just those indirect reference value to like, oh yeah, they're in the same space is hugely valuable. Yeah,
for sure, for sure. What didn't work when trying to promote the book?
I like my goal was to get 50 reviews in 50 days just to get a critical mass of good reviews up there. That was literally hand-to-hand combat for me.
Did you do it? Did you do it?
Yeah, I did it. I did it. But I mean, people just don't think of, even if they love the book, and I hear it all the time, they don't think about going to do a review. And so just building into your marketing or whatever, it's like, if you liked it and you started with it, which is smart, is the idea that, hey, reviews would be helpful. Making that organic, that didn't, that I had no plan for that whatsoever.
Right. Almost like an afterthought in a way. But but the funny thing is that I remember when you asked me to review it, and I feel like it was certainly way ahead of when it was coming out. You know what I mean? I feel like it was like maybe a couple of months before. So I give you a lot of credit for that. And you did it. I mean, you had the goal of 50 and you did it for sure. And I imagine that, to your point about critical mass, and something I frankly had not been thinking about, but when you get that critical mass, I would imagine that somehow Amazon or wherever it is sort of notices and said, oh, wait a minute, a lot of people are reviewing this book. Like, let's, I don't know, show it to more people, or however it works,
Well, to your point, the another pure book lead was a guy it's a team down in Houston. He listens to a new book every month just to stay sharp on sales and go-to-market strategy. So after he read Mark Robert's book by Audible, The Sales Acceleration Formula, this was recommended next.
Oh, wow. Very good.
So he listened to it, and they're working very much on go-to-market alignment, not just and positioning. He listened to it. He bought the book for his team. They read it. They got on a Zoom call with me and literally started, like, at one point in the call, it was hilarious. They just said, okay, and next you're going to run this play, and next you're going to run this play. Like, you guys know the book better than I do.
That is so great. I love it.
So those Amazon reviews, then Amazon will serve you up as a recommended for sure. Anything you would have done differently? I think the main thing I would have said, what I said at the outset, is if you think you're going to write a book, start your platform as soon as possible. I remember when, and this is the other plug I would give, is I was fortunate to have David Meerman Scott as a book coach, and he's a very sought after keynote speaker in the marketing and growth space. He was grounded by COVID in March of 2020, like we all were. So I started with him in May of 2020, and and I think he's now doing it like this is full-time gig. So I would recommend him to anybody. He's written 13 books. So having somebody, there's all kinds of like these decisions you have to make that you're never really thinking about, right? Which is, okay, what is my secret sauce? Where am I positioning? What's the book title going to be to reflect that? How do I put together individual chapters and then tell a story? Who's my publisher going to be? What formats am I going to publish in? How am I going to structure this each chapter? So there's all these kind of things that, he just could show up on a call and give me 3 options. And made a huge difference in going through it. And when we got to the publisher, it was like, okay, do you want to self-publish? You want a hybrid publisher? Do you want a traditional publisher? You want a traditional publisher, you got to show them you got the platform to sell 10,000 books in a year.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, well, let's X that out. Let's talk about options A and B. So I think the sooner you start to develop a platform, the better. A book will accelerate your platform, but you need the platform to then start dosing out the content. So start immediately. Thinking about building a book, start today on how are you building your content platform to build an audience that's going to start to follow you.
Yeah, it's such a big challenge. It's actually just the fact that it's out there, at least for me personally, it gives me something, and I need this, frankly, especially as a business owner. It gives me something to focus on for a long period of time. You know what I mean? Like where it's like, what you're building towards for over a year. For me, my goal is, to have it out December of 2023, but it's like, what you're building for, and it keeps you focusing. For me personally, and you probably found this as well, just in giving the examples that you were talking about in terms of repurposing your content, is that it gives you, reasons to be communicating with your audience in a very focused and clear way with that one value proposition in mind. With, obviously, in your case, it was the revenue acceleration and how to do all that. So that's really, really cool. What about surprises? Anything that surprised you about the book promotion, either positively or negatively?
I think this was the other thing is you get a publisher. If you don't get one of those big publishers that gives you 7% of the royalties, and they have to make money by promoting it. If you self-publish or you use a hybrid publisher, it's like they're distributors and they sell books to Amazon and they sell books to Barnes and Nobles and they sell books to college bookstores, but they don't go into those bookstores and promote. Right. So, and if there's not somebody in the bookstore promoting, guess what? People don't really buy the book. So I would think about what is your retail distribution strategy? And that could be book signings. It could be you have agents in college campuses or in offices that are going around selling the books. It could be it becomes part of you. If you're already speaking, it becomes you bundle in books into your kind of speaking engagements. But that, for us, most of the book purchases are by teams that are either working with us or considering working with us.
Which way did you go with the publishing? Like which of the
hybrid?
Okay. Yep. Hybrid.
And I went with a company called Page 2, which is in Vancouver, and they did a fantastic job. Happy to make an introduction there. I mean, they work kind of with entrepreneurs that have a point of view, and that is their sweet spot. They did just an awesome job on the design of the book. It was a beautiful cover, beautiful graphics. Yeah, they did an awesome job, but they don't, they're not in the stores, right?
Right.
So they can sell it to distributors, but they can't then make it that people buy as they go.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about how it impacted the people that you were, that ultimately heard the book, right? And hopefully your clients. Like what difference did it make? How did it land with sales and sales leadership in your audience?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I would highlight 2 things that really landed for people. Number one is, what does being buyer-centric or buyer-first, what does that mean in practice? We hear this all bandied about all the time. And what does that actually mean? And it's in the book, but I did do a public speaking course with Heroic Public Speaking. to write a speech around it, and have done a bunch of talks using that speech. As I wrote that, this idea of authentic conversations, what does that really mean? Well, for us, it came down to every conversation with a buyer or a customer, you need to recenter on your buyer or customer 3 times.
Mm.
You need to always start with, why are they talking to you? What's their goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason you do that is then you can personalize the conversation. You talk about only your product or demo, only the part of your products that they care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
And you share stories of peers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third part is you come back at the very end and you ask them to do stuff, right? Because until they're willing to do stuff, you don't have a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have momentum. So we just kind of broke it down to, look, you got to always, in every conversation, it's about buyer why, it's about buyer personalization, it's about buyer action.
And when you say buyer action, or they need to do stuff, do you mean like they need to basically make a purchase, engage? Is there something before that you're?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about a sales process, and we talked about this a little bit in our first, we talked about sales discovery and deal velocity. And
Mm-hmm.
you think about how it evolves, usually you start with some type of discovery call. And so there they need to hear enough value to say, I'm going to bring in other people in my organization. I'm going to commit to a next meeting. I'm going to share and socialize your value prop, how you can make us more successful with my boss, with a funder, with potential users. And then their next actions in that meeting might be to, hey, prioritize of all the things you talked about, what's most important, where would we start, where would we continue? Do they have a timeline for working with you? Do they have funding for working with you? Next action might be putting a contract in front of legal. So the idea is at the end of every call, here's where we are in terms of believing we should partner. Here's what I'm going to do next. Here's what I would suggest you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, do next. Are you willing to commit to that? I think you could start with a purchase. And when we work with more kind of product-led growth companies that are either have a freemium or a low-cost model that starts with an end user purchase or a trial, and they usually come to us at about the point, it's like, how do I get above a $2,500 price point? And it's like, well, you got to sell to people with bigger budgets. So yes, your first ask was, hey, buy this and try it. But then your second ask is getting that initial buyer to tell you about the value that could be taken to other people like them and selling it to their boss, their department head, their group leader, et cetera. So in selling, I mean, in the old world of selling, sales process was all about what the seller does, right? We do a discovery call, we do a demo, we write a proposal, we have a close plan. The new world of selling, really what you do doesn't matter for squat. You got to do all that stuff, but what matters is, what does your buyer commit to doing? Or are they distracted with something else immediately after the call?
Very interesting. And so with the book, that all of what you just said, I would imagine helped sales leaders unpack what you started with, which is that everybody banties about the word authentic, buyer, customer centric selling, but your book really unpacks it and shows this is what it means. This is what, when I say action, this is what action should look like in this journey.
That's right. I mean, it really sort of helps people say, basically, the argument is you got to do that in good selling or good customer success. Every single conversation starts again with the buyer why, or we talk about it as buyer success. How can you make them more successful? Buyer success, buyer personalization, buyer actions. Or if you want to expand with an existing account, customer success, what have you done? What can you do more of? Personalization, customer action. So you got to think about organizing every conversation. The call management is around those 3 things, which says there's an opportunity to do business or more business. And so the playbooks really just make it easier to do that at different phases of the buyer and customer journey.
We always ask when we're interviewing salespeople or sales leaders, walk me through your sales process, right? Walk me through from lead to close, what that looks like. Should I be flipping that around, given what you just said? In other words, should I be saying, like, how does your buyer buy? Like, walk me through your buyer's process and see if they understand what their buyers, or their typical buyer, how they buy? Or is that,
I think you could ask them both, but I think a great question would be, how do you know when your buyer is ready to buy? Or how
yeah.
do you know when your buyer is ready to move to the next step?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if your buyer sees you as part of a more successful future?
Mm-hmm.
Because for us, the whole point of so one key takeaway for folks is this idea, what does a buyer-centric or an authentic conversation mean? And it has those three parts, and you should do it every time, and they should build on each other. The other thing I think people really took away from it is that when we shift from product-driven selling to a value-driven go-to-market strategy that's about my buyer, customer, and their why, how I can make them more successful, it leads to a much more seamless buyer or customer journey. Because when I'm focused on what makes you more successful, that's really a lot easier to hand off from a discovery call to a buying group call to a closing call to the procurement team, right? It's a lot easier to hand off to my customer success team because it's all about those goals for the reason you started and that you want to go deep on and that can be expanded on. It creates continuity across the entire buyer and customer journey. Whereas when I'm thinking about, hey, I have to get these things out of a discovery call so I can send a follow-up email and proposal, that's like herky jerky. That's inside out. So the other thing I think people got is if you in this modern environment where buyers and customers follow their own process, you got to start with what they value.
Right. Yep.
You got to start with it. You always got to re-anchor on what they value. So we got to this idea of a success statement, which is again in the book, but this idea of a success statement, the whole purpose of every sales call is to get to a success statement, revise a success statement, prioritize. It's just them telling us in their words how we can make them more successful.
And again, if you want to learn more about that, episode 73, Brent goes into that in more depth for sure. One of the things you mentioned, one of the three things you mentioned is, stories, right? Sharing stories. Tell me why that is so effective and so important in this process.
Yeah, it's basically an immediate flip of the switch happens from vendor to buyer to peer to peer. Because I am sharing a story about somebody like you around a common problem we're trying to solve.
Right.
And I tell in my speech, I tell a story about it's a kind of a composite client individual, Samir Husani, what were his learnings? What he ran this method, became dramatically more successful. 5-figure deals routinely turning into 6-figure deals, this accelerated land and expand motion. And I asked him, like, as you were shifting, what changed? And one thing he shared was what we talked about, that before I showed up and I thought the point was to show as much product as possible and to see what would stick. And now the whole point was to get to a success statement. But then the second thing he said is before I basically, every one of my product discussions was generic. And now my goal was to get to a point of fit where they said, so I could share a story, and he sold into the industrial automations plan. He gave an example of, I remember going to a plant manager who said, yeah, we have a problem with our maintenance planning and predictive maintenance. And rather than going through my feature list, I just said to him, yeah, I was just down the road with one of your colleagues, a plant manager that had the same exact problem. This is how our solution kind of reduced the breakage. And he said, and the guy sat straight up, said, tell me more about that.
Right. That's amazing.
So stories make you a peer to your buyers and like a value-added trusted advisor.
You do a great job of that in the book as well, for sure. It's you lay it out and then you give examples of real life customers that you've worked with and the success that they've had. I put something on LinkedIn, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about there's this notion in sales hiring, if you will, that you need domain expertise in order to be successful in something, which I disagree with,
Me
but
too.
I can't necessarily just say I disagree with it, because the client might look at me and say, well, you have an agenda. You want to, us to hire this person that doesn't have experience, or these kinds of people that don't have experience. But so what I did was, to your point, was gentleman by the name of Chris Merritt, who's the president of field operations and CRO of Cloudflare, that took them from 1 million to $1 billion over the 9 years of his career. I laid it all out. He started off he was an analyst at Accenture, and then he was at like Boston Market, and then FedEx, and then Monster and Yahoo and some other sort of place. And then, there he was, Cloudflare. My whole point is that nobody, I know a lot of people that wouldn't have hired him, never mind taking an interview. They wouldn't even take an interview with him. And so, to your point, like, I wanted to get that story out, right? That sort of anecdote, and say, hey, look at this. It's not me. It's, look at this person. This person did it. That company hired him. Look what that look how large and successful that company has become over the 9 years, right? So, to your point, they're so powerful when you can show it from not your angle, but from somebody else's that is ultimately a pair of theirs as well.
Our next revenue leader story is with the chief revenue officer at TrueFit, Monica Gout.
Mm-hmm.
And it aligns exactly with that. Like, she was not trained as a sales professional.
Mm.
She was trained as a consultant.
Mm.
And she, in like literally 2 years, went, hired as a line seller, most successful line seller, ran their customer success organization into being the CRO, because she was so good at just the consultative. She didn't have any sales training. She was just good at the consultative aspect of getting the buyer to basically do the solutioning for you.
Well, you know what? You bring up another good point, or a thought that comes to mind, which is that it's almost like, given, when you're talking about product-led growth companies or buyer-centric sales processes, I guess, if you will, it's almost like we need to rethink the sales profession traits, right? In other words, the traits that once made up and aligned to, the great athlete, the maverick, whatever it might be, to something that's completely different. And my belief is that, people who start to see, like your example of the woman that you just mentioned from TrueFit, they start to see that those people are the salespeople of the future, frankly, and can be more effective. It's going to change, and I think those are the people that are gonna win.
Yeah, no question that in the current environment, I mean, to your point, like in this talk that I give, if you look at the 2010s, it was a so-called period of massive innovation, right, in sales strategy and technology. And it was, look, the guys who wrote Challenger's Sale, it's a brilliant book, and it's well argued, and it set off this wave of innovation around teach, tailor, and take control. Who's the hero in that story?
Right, exactly, the salesperson.
Right? Yep. So totally reinforce this idea that salespeople have to be in charge, and look, actually miss the message around leading with challenges, because what most people heard is, I need to teach my buyer, I need to take control of the sale. So we had this decade of innovation around how can salespeople be more in charge, and performance dropped off the face of 2009, 58% of people on quota. 2019, 42%. Now it's
wow.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. The traditional methodologies do not work. It's now much more about those consultative skills, being a trusted advisor, being able to good discovery, guided discovery, leading somebody to their own conclusion, and being collaborative. And being collaborative doesn't mean being kind of a pushover.
Yeah.
It means looking for fit. Right. It means, I'm going to do this. Are you open to doing this? Right. Are we going to partner, or are we not a fit? Right. At every stage. So definitely a new set of problem solving, consultative, other oriented, good discovery, more collaboration on finding the right partnership. We're in a whole new world for sure.
We call it product prospect fit as opposed to product market fit.
Yeah.
What about what's next? Another book, perhaps, about the new, perhaps I've got here's one about a book about the new kind of salesperson for the 2020s.
Huh. No, I like it. I like it a lot. It fits into what we're seeing. The winning combination for us
Hmm.
is where you basically have, and it's a little more complicated, but you can start with any one of these. You have marketing leadership buy-in, sales leadership buy-in, and then C-suite
Mhm.
buy-in. Because what we are really good at, and in this, it's not just us, but in this buyer first, buyer centric world, you have to be really good at positioning value and making that sales executable.
Mhm.
And it requires a different mindset.
Mhm.
So we started with kind of the sales and the account management teams. What the directions we're kind of building out is, okay, what does it mean for marketing to actually build that integrated marketing journey, and how do you develop content in a strategic way
Mhm.
that can connect website to prospecting to sales to success? And this sort of in the book, but we're building that out, and there's a book in that. But then on the, what does the 21st century salesperson look like? CEOs have to change their mindset on this. They have to understand that they have two jobs that they often kick off to others. One is to own go-to-market strategy, because they're the only ones that can own end-to-end marketing through the product. And they want other people to own it because it kind of sucks, right? And the second is, you hear from CEOs all the time, like people that don't buy into what we're saying, like, oh, I hire experienced people. We do all this already.
Mhm.
My answer is, look, your experience is a rear view mirror. You need to hire people that are committed to being best in class.
All
And
right.
they're only going to do that if they're really good learners.
Such a good point.
So CEOs need to hire sales leaders that are committed to learning. So they hire sales teams that are committing to outside in learning. And if you commit to that, you will outperform the market. I mean, we're starting to get a lot more momentum around our proof points, but the reality is I have never seen a company fail that commits to this approach. Never.
That's amazing, and that's one of the things how I ended a post, that same post that I was just alluding to, something to the effect of, don't hire people for what they did, hire people for what they can do. That's amazing.
Mm.
For sure. So but I alluded to another book. I mean, are you think maybe
we over time we'll write a book for marketing leadership and a book for CEOs.
Yep.
We'll ideally have a compendium of books. I've been trying to see if I can trademark the Authenticity Wins name, which we own the domain, but I'd love to have 3 books under that rubric. One for, sales and account management success, people that have conversations every day, one marketing leadership, one for CEOs, but that's probably a 5-year project to get those other 2 books done.
Yep. I hear you. Well, I'll have you back on again to promote that
I appreciate that.
in 5 years. You ready for the rapid fire 5?
I am ready for the rapid fire 5.
All right, here we go. What motivates you?
What motivates me is winning and winning with others.
Name a big goal you have right now, and when would you like to accomplish it?
I want to double the number of sales qualified opportunities, and I want to do it this quarter. And we're already, as I said to you, we've done it 2 months in a row. I've got to see that that's sustainable.
What's your most preferred way to learn new information and stay sharp?
Honestly, for me, it's most helpful to read it and then hear it.
Okay.
To read it and then say it out loud and have somebody play it back to you.
Okay. How many hours of sleep do you average per night?
Oh, I'm an 8-hour a night guy.
Jealous.
I burn like at 110% all day. I'm on all day long. It wears my family out, but 8 hours a night, I'm out.
Takes me so long to come down, so that's why I only end up with like 5 or 6.
Mm.
What's your favorite thing to do when you aren't working?
Well, I mean, probably hanging out with my family, but other than that is karate. I'm fairly committed to martial arts, and for me it's just a great way to get a workout and a meditation in at the same time.
Did you achieve a certain level at the same time with one of your kids? I think you told me
Yeah,
that.
yeah. With my son, he and I promoted. He did his first degree. I did my second degree, black belt. We did it together. Our discipline is Weichido Karate. It's Okinawa based, and that was a blessing to be able to. We trained together for about 9 months, and it was just awesome to train together and then to do it together. It was awesome.
One of the reasons why I like meeting you for lunch, because you all can also double as my bodyguard, which is very nice. That's
Although
always
these days I would send my son. He's now 6'2", and he's a big kid, and he also has a black belt. I would send him.
yeah, there you go. Well, bring him next time. All right. There's
I will bring him next time.
never too much protection.
No,
Just start
sir.
walking
No,
my
sir.
daughter to school. How can people reach out to you to say thank you for doing this, or to follow up with you and maybe ask you questions that I didn't ask?
Yeah, I mean, look, just find me on LinkedIn. I respond to every note on LinkedIn that's not a ad. So that would be the easiest. They're also welcome to email me at bkeltner@winalytics.com. But LinkedIn is great.
Fabulous. Brent Keltner, thanks again for going over quota.
Jay, always awesome to be with you.
Goodbye, everybody. Cue in the music.